in March, as soon as the pandemic hit, and it's been so hard for us to continue doing our business without the element of community, without like seeing people and talking to people and having them in our space and having an interaction. And as much as we've tried to continue to do that behind the scenes, it brings me so much joy to finally bring some of the stuff that we have been doing, or some of the connections that we've been making and cultivating behind the scenes to the forefront. And one of those has been with this incredible group of women. And today we are here to have a conversation about their organization and their work and some of the work that we're trying to do together, and just creating communities of like-minded individuals and space for things that we feel are important. We created a product together, which was a joy for me. And the product is for sale today for anybody that wants to support it. 100% of proceeds go towards the Defend Black Women March, which is happening in
July 29th to the 31st.
In DC.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
If anyone can make it to the march, that would be amazing. But if not, you can show your support in other ways. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Trinice.
Then I share a little bit about myself after we all go kind of round robin.
Yeah. Trinice, Jaimee, and Nakisha, and then we'll introduce themselves and then we'll
Thanks, Mom.
Peace, y'all. How you doing?
Hey. We're so excited that it's like really intimate. So I'm just really happy to see everyone here today. I want to share a little bit about myself. This is just a conversation, right? We're just talking. We're just trying to make interventions, and this feels like a comfy living room space, right? Like we're all together. We're hoping that folks like feel safe and feel great. And before I go on any further, my name is Trinice McNally. I use she/her pronouns. I'm originally from London, England, by way of Jamaica. My family got to Jamaica because of the brainwashed generation post World War II. Grew up in Miami when I moved there at 3 years old, and grew up undocumented. So a lot of the framing is based on my lived experience when we talk about defending Black women as a Black queer migrant and survivor, and I'm truly honored to be here. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Jaimee Swift, I use she/her pronouns. I'm the executive director and founder of Black Men Radicals. And Black Men Radicals is a Black feminist advocacy organization dedicated to uplifting and centering Black women and gender expansive activists around the world. I come to this work just enthralled by Black women and gender expansive people and the work that we do every single day. No matter how much they try to erase our leadership and advocacy and legacy, we are here and always have been, period. And that's all I gotta say about that.
And following that, all my sisters here, I am Nakisha. I use she/her pronouns, and I am the president and CEO of an organization called Breakthrough. We are a human rights organization, a global human rights organization that uses media, pop culture, tech, and all sort of new ways that people are communicating to disrupt dominant narratives that are harmful to our people, particularly on a quest to end gender-based violence. So our work is to elevate and to help articulate the stories of women, girls, and gender-expansive people around the globe. I recently took the helm of the organization to really center and focus us here in the U.S., but particularly still with an eye towards global affairs and expanding our territory across Latin America and the Caribbean.
Can I just highlight that all presidents and CEOs?
Oh, thank you, Melody. We're next to the ultimate creative designer and CEO, so let's give it up for Melody Ehsani. So before we get started, just wanted to say that this conversation is a safe space, right? So how BWR, Black Men Radicals, gets down with establishing a safe space, we say like there's no transphobia, anti-Blackness, xenophobia, ableism, things of that nature are not allowed, and just please respect this wonderful space, and yeah, there's this conversation, so we just want to ground that with that.
And if I could, I'd just extend that to the online space. So we're really, really, I think, fortunate and really excited that folks are able to join us out in the atmosphere online. And so if you're, if you're texting, if you're in the chat, be respectful of each other in the chat as well.
Awesome, sounds good. And the last thing I want to add before we plug in and get started is that this is a fishbowl experience. So what we're trying to create is like kind of this metaphor of us being in this fish tank together, we're the fish, right? And you're observing this conversation, right? And like being a part of the conversation. What we hope for after is that you have any questions, anything you wanna like, and I felt this when you said this, or I actually don't understand this, right? Can you share more about this, or, right? Like we wanna make sure that we're able to be in conversation together and you're observing that conversation so everyone can get like as much as they need. And then after that, like there's plenty of time for Q&A and just engagement. So we like to call this in education spaces, fishbowl conversations, right? Where the panelists are in conversation with each other. All right, so let's get started. Could we all like move our chairs up a little bit?
I know, I feel like.
Make sure we stay in the.
I know, we don't want to get
Hurry up, yeah, no problem.
All right, so I kind of want to first start off with a little reflection and reclamation. And I want to hear from y'all around like what were moments that politicized you. And while you're thinking about that, I'm trying to think back. I'm like, how do I create this question that I never know what I'm going to say? That's really funny. It's like, what is my moment? I think that like we're constantly being repoliticized, right? Like each time something terrible happens, each time something beautiful happens, right? It makes it easier for us to transform and like possibility changes. And I think for me, my earliest memory of now I'm like, hey, I was being politicized by my grandma, who probably wouldn't even have called herself a Black feminist. Like my grandmother didn't have like a collegiate degree or access to any of these fancy frameworks or like, you know, any of that. But she was really clear about the ways that she had to navigate because she was a woman, right? And like she would always share that. She had her first open heart surgery when she was 19. But at 12 years old, she got diagnosed with rheumatic fever, which in the Caribbean, you know, our healthcare is still shit, right? But it was even shittier, right, like back then. And she talked about like wanting to be a doctor, and she couldn't go to med school because she was a woman. So this is in the 60s. She just moved from Jamaica to the UK. She has this heart diagnosis. She just gets married to my grandfather. Pregnant 3 months down the aisle, shotgun wedding, nobody knows, right? But like in her that she's actually pregnant. And then she's denied her ability to go to law school and has to start like cleaning houses. And she talks about like, she talked to me about her dreams being taken from her and like for no one to, reminding me to not let anyone to take my dreams from me. And like, I think that was a very clear moment. And like, it wasn't even such a big deal. I was like, I want to go to the creative writing program, but it's out of our district. And she was like, we're gonna figure out how to get you into that school. But in Miami and in a lot of public schools, when you're undocumented, there's a lot of paperwork that you gotta have to get into public schools. So what you have to do is you have to go to the school in your neighborhood. And I found out that I was able to get like a waiver, right, to go through this creative writing program. But like that moment was like, if you wanna go to this creative writing program, then like we're gonna figure out how to get you in that program. And I know it feels scary because you don't have like identification, like I didn't have any of those things. I couldn't even drive legally with a driver's license until like my sophomore year of college. Like I didn't have a driver's license, I didn't have like any of those things except a passport, which is like 14 months passport. And then it's like out of status. Like, so my grandmother, I think that's my earliest memory of her like sitting me down and saying like, don't let these people take your dream from you because I can't go to med school. Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know. I think about my grandma will be 80 and it's November, right? And just hearing about like how to cherish our like grandmothers, our other mothers, our aunties, and the people in our family. And I will say like growing up, like my grandmother is one of the mothers of our church, and to see her like she said she wouldn't label herself a feminist, but she was always like, get your education, and she's always like dressed to the nines, like and wearing her big hat and always just like telling me to keep going when I keep doubting myself. And I think that my grandmother and my mother are my original Black women radicals, right? Like, and just seeing how like, I don't care what patriarchal order says, like it's women running the church. Like it's women in these spaces. And I see my grandmother, she raised her 5 children by herself after her mother had a heart attack and passed away on the plantation sharecropping in Arkansas. So where I come from, my mom's side, is from Arkansas, and my grandmother migrated to Philly for a better life. She said the Lord told her in a dream to migrate to Philly with her 5 children by herself for a better life. She started a soul food restaurant called House of Plenty in West Philly, and she made it, you know, for them. And it's like that type of fortitude that like, that endurance, and also like the lack of rest. I realize she's always telling me to rest. And I'm like, that's what's politicized me about her. I will say mostly that I've seen my mother and my grandmother like work, and they just want us to like live out our dreams and then have the ability to rest because they didn't. And like that generational trauma of labor and enslavement, and it falls into maternal mortality for Black women, and we see Roe v. Wade, we see all these different things, right? And so like I would see my grandmother, my mother, and like the mothers of my church politicize me because they don't be playing, y'all. I don't know, I still sit straight up with them, and they really encourage me to not let anti-Blackness or misogynoir dictate where I can or cannot go. And so I really appreciate that politicization, excuse me. Yeah, so I'm gonna pass it off to Nakisha. I don't wanna cry, cause I'll start crying with my grandma. Ooh, oh my goodness. And the eyelashes, they stick into my ears.
So I mean, not to like make this a grandma, mama party, but I too am the child of immigrants and come to this country by way of the Caribbean. So my parents are from Antigua and Dominica. My mom came here. For most folks, when they think about when folks migrate, pretty late in life. She was in her later 30s when she came, and was the eldest of 6 kids, and so waited for everyone on the island to be okay, and so at least go to school and to do those things before she, I think really set out to have her own life. And I, knowing just a little bit of that story growing up, but then also living in that with her, as once she got here, she had kids, and a couple of dreams were deferred. And watching her trying to navigate this country as a single mom with 2 kids, finding herself in impoverished conditions. And I think I just always really hyper aware of our situation as a kid. And I think that's sort of not necessarily just my mother herself, but that situation is really what started my political journey, or my understanding of what it means to be in this country, to be a border crosser, right? So of this land, of this world, but not of this land. And that there are these things as boundaries, and that means that you will have access or you won't have access. And we ended up on the the side of no access, the side of disenfranchisement. And so I watched women fight. And my mom, being in this country by herself, I grew up in Boston. And Boston, I guess, was just home to a number of other Black women from other countries, from across the Caribbean and West Africa. And so I literally grew up in a village of women who mostly met each other as domestic workers. They worked convalescent homes, they worked all kinds of jobs, multiple shifts. And so as kids, were, taken care of by everybody, right? So when your mom wasn't working and she was, caring for these kids, and the woman who I call my grandma, who came to this country from Liberia, in the midst of the civil war there, her daughter, one of her eldest daughters, was working with my mom at a nursing home, and they worked together to bring them over, to bring my grandma, and then my aunts and uncles and my cousins all came. And so I was raised with these folks. I really also grew up believing that I'm very much Liberian, and that village of women. So all of my aunties, and my grandma, this whole community is where I think all my political seeds really come from. They are my North Star, who I look to. They've all had, I think, difficult lives in their own ways. And I've just watched them, persevere. Hasn't always been good, so I think I love a good story with a happy ending that everyone fought and struggled and everyone ended up okay. And that's not really true. And so I think what that planted for me was the idea that you keep going, and you keep going in community, right? So that when things are difficult for you, the goal ought to be, right, to focus out. That if you focus out on your people and those around you, then you too get taken care of inside of it, right? So when you're looking for solutions to whatever the issue is that you may be having, whether it's food insecurity or housing insecurity, all things, that we experience as kids growing up. I just watched these women be so ingenuitive, right? I think they might as well just be engineers, right? Really trying to find solutions to their problems, almost all as undocumented folks. So really understanding what that means, and being a first generation American, and as a kid needing to help navigate systems for these adults around you. That for me really created the reality, like the stark reality that fairness and justice doesn't necessarily exist here. That it's something that we have to be in search of, even before I actually knew those words, right? I went to really privileged schools, to the busing program, right? My mother really seeking out what are those opportunities, right? So the creative writing program, for me it was a busing program to go to school in the suburbs. And so crossing those tracks every day, it was just always from kindergarten, so like from 4 years old, a very clear reminder that equity doesn't live here and that it's something that we've got to create. I think that's how I arrived at that, right? Is really being rooted in the experience of my aunties and women around me.
What about you, Melody?
It's so funny. I mean, I love the through line in all those stories. I actually had a similar but very different experience in the sense that I too was born here to first generation immigrants that had come from Iran. But all the women in my family were very kind of disempowered. And I don't mean to say anything bad about my mom or my grandmother, the loves of my life, but it was very much like conditioned that you just sort of stay quiet, you keep your head down, you always defer to the masculine. And I think at a really young age, I mean, after doing so much inner work later in life, I think that at a very young age, I sort of lost respect for my mom because I always saw her being the smartest person in the room. That was always making herself smaller or deferring to my uncle or my dad or whoever it was. And I just picked up on that super early. And as you guys were talking, I was like, that must be why I had such an affinity towards Black women at such a young age, because I feel like I had the privilege of growing up in a really special sort of spiritual community. I grew up in the Baha'i faith, and the Baha'i Center is on La Cienega and Rodeo, and it's a super diverse religion. And so at a very young age, I had people in my community that sort of like took me under, and I was looking for things, like, even though I didn't realize it at the time, I think I was looking for people, or I think I knew the difference between like, oh, that's what I want to be, and that's what I don't want to do. I don't want to do that. And so a lot of my motivation and inspiration, and I think what politicized me, was seeing what I wanted to break with at a very young age and what I didn't want to repeat. And as I've grown older, it's made so much more sense to me because I'm like, oh my God, this shit has been in my DNA, where like I learned this story that my grandmother passed away maybe 10 years ago, but she always lived alone. She had a husband, my grandfather, who after there was a revolution in Iran in 1979, she came to America, he went to Canada. It was just how it played out. And so as far as, I had never met him, and as far as I know, she was always single, she was always depressed, she was kind of like sick always. And I learned literally 3 years ago that when she was 17, she met the love of her life, like the love of her life. And he happened to be from a good family, and he happened to be a doctor, and he checked off all the stupid boxes that were the rule, and they got married, and they were married for a year, and he couldn't produce children. There was like something, he wasn't able to have children. So my grandmother's father forced them to split up because they were like, my daughter can't, be there, she can't not have children. So they literally forced them to split. They both tried to commit suicide. Both of them, like they were so heartbroken and they were each other's person. And then maybe like 2 years later, they ended up arranging my grandmother to get married, which was normal. And she married somebody that was 40 years older than her, which was my grandfather. So she was like 19 and he was in his 50s. He already had 4 children from a previous marriage. His wife had died during childbirth. And here she is, like this young, beautiful, like smart, married to some like old ass man who has to be like Instamom and doesn't even love him or anything. And so everything made sense. I was like, no wonder she was so depressed. No wonder blah blah blah. No wonder. And then no wonder that's in me because I was so rebellious against getting married or being arranged or not having my own business or not whatever. So I think that initially started with me, and I think it kind of turned me off from my culture for a little while because it was so deeply embedded into it that there's so many things like I just kept realizing. I was like, oh my God, my mom, because I'm not a seductive person, and I think I'm attractive, but I'm not like, I don't know how to do the whole thing. I just don't. My mom and the women, especially on my mom's side of the family, they'd always make comments to me like, you don't know how to do it. Like you're not smart enough. Like or you're not cunning enough. Like you don't know how to get a man. And so I grew up this whole time thinking like, shit, I don't know how to do it. I'm never gonna get married. I'm just not. No. And then I was like, these motherfuckers are trying to teach me how to be seductive. Like that's an attribute of God, but that's so deeply embedded in the culture that you have to do this thing to like get a man, and then you have to. It's like no wonder so many people are getting divorces because you're not really marrying or using the power of attraction to be attracted to who you really want to. You're using trickery, and you want to like, get whoever's richest or is from the best or whatever meets your criteria, versus like finding somebody that's mutual, that you could have like mutuality with. Whew. So,
I'm like, let's take a breath. I know. And I'm like, now how do we pivot? It's all really like heavy and also like super transformational what we share, right? Like things are not just painful for no reason, right? Like we don't experience these things and these experiences for it to stay the same. Like hence your story, right? You're like, nah, fuck that. I was real clear when I was like as a child.
well, I think that the beauty of that is like, I broke that cycle.
Yes.
Just like generations.
Yes. Yes.
And so if I ever have kids, or even if I don't, I feel like it ended with me. Like,
Exactly.
Exactly. And I think that's the privilege in it. Like before I used to be like, why? Why do I have to be the one? Like, why is this all on me? And then it really shifted for me. I was like, no, it's actually my privilege. Like, this is amazing. Like, I get to do this.
Yes.
And so I think that's the way we have to approach the work that we all do. It's like, it's our privilege to be here and move it forward.
Right.
Like, not repeat it. We get to do it.
I'm glad you said that because, and I'm just going to say this really quickly. I was told not to go to therapy, for example. Like that I needed to just go to church. And that really messed me up for a long time. And I'm not trusting of people, so it's like I would keep everything bottled in. But no, I'm gonna go to therapy. And I can still, you know what I mean? And my siblings are the ones that are breaking this. So it's like, you're right. It's like we're in this position to like break these cycles of violence.
Yes.
And like it's tough and it's hard. But like I said, like from my womb, I don't want my children to have to go through that or have to go through what I go through, or my grandmother or my mother did, right? And so thank you for saying that because we're breaking these cycles all the time. I mean, look, we're here at your store.
Yeah.
That's seriously like a wow, So so this is like I feel like I'm in therapy. I got a therapy session and I'm
Thank God, I dodged my therapist for 3 weeks.
Oh.
I'm like, accountability. I have abilities like, yeah. It's like, wow, from every angle. But I think to pivot us, I think you all just perfectly transitioned us, right? It's like, why do we do the work that we do, right? Like, what is it about our experiences? What is it about the things that we've seen, the things that we've made a decision, right? An active choice and embodying like self-determination. Like, I am actually not gonna do this shit anymore. Or if I have to navigate, I'm gonna navigate for the sake of, right? In order so something else can happen. So I just wanna hear from y'all around, like, why do you do the work that you do? Because to me, all of you are women in defiance, right? Like, what it means to like survive, that's what Marielle Franco says, right? Like, surviving in the midst of what? In resistance movements. Like, every day we make a choice to still be here. And we know the fuck shit that's happening around us. That actually doesn't feel like it's gonna change right now. And like, it has been largely the work of like these women and gender expansive people in particular that have made it possible, even for this moment right now. So just wanting to hear from you all more about like, so what made you do this work, right? Is to me, all of you are women in defiance. And I want like other people to learn more about that as well.
If I'm being honest, the work actually chose me. You know, I'm really, really clear that this is my life's work, that this is a calling. I know because I tried to run away from it. You know, if I have a faith tradition to which I'm most attached, I'd say it's Christianity. And one of the Bible characters that I very much identify with is Jonah. And I feel like, you know, life is often dealing with these Nineveh moments. For those of you who know the story, you know, Jonah, he is sent to Nineveh to deliver a message, not a message that people really want to hear. It's kind of gloomy and doomy. And he's like, nah, you know, he's hiding, and he's like trying to hide, and God's like, you really can't hide. And then, you know, he ends up, you know, running off onto a boat and, you know, almost sinking the boat with, you know, these folks who were not minding their business, and he ends up in the belly of a whale, right? So hence Jonah in the belly of a whale. But I tend to say, when you try to run from your calling, you not only can cause destruction for yourself, but for other people around you. When you are given a mission, you gotta fulfill it, you know? And it's surrendering to that, submitting to the calling that God, that whatever the higher being that spirits have called for you to do, can be your greatest blessing, right? So choose the blessing. I'm not gonna offer that to anybody, but yeah, that's how I know that this work is my work. My whole life is about the love and the liberation of Black women. I love Black women with everything in me. Even when it's hard, you know, we said we're keeping it real, right? And so that's also how I know this is my work, is that, you know, in the tough moments, you know, sometimes all skin folk aren't kinfolk. You know, and all sisters don't show up the way that we need them to, right? And that can be tough. But when you know that you still have got more to do, when you know there's still another road to cross, you know, there's still more journeys in front of us. And then also being clear that I'm not the beginning of the work, right? Like I'm somewhere on this continuum, and I'm not the ending of the work.
Yes.
And so I've got my work and my time on this planet in this way, and maybe in another way in another lifetime. That's what keeps me going. That's how I know this is my work. And it's also what fills me back up. So it's what can be depleting at times, and it's also it's my re-energizer. I feel like there's like a 90s R&B song that, you know, sort of helps to illustrate that the cause and cure is you. There is why I know. But right, like, you know, Black women are my cause and my cure, and so us being free, us getting free, like really, really free, and that also means both free in mind and spirit, like not just actual physical shackles coming off of us, but, you know, doing this, right, reclaiming our lineage, creating new stories for our people, is what it's our right.
Yeah.
And when something is your right, you fight like hell for it. And you're willing to, you know, wrestle all demons, and that's what I'm here to do.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
How you follow up?
No.
found, and I think about the ways like how I came to the work, like I always knew that there was an injustice happening. Like even as a child, I just didn't have the language for it. And then I also was questioning things like my mom would be like, you need to do this. I'll be like, why? Because I said so. I'll be like, why? You know, I get smacked for it, but you know, but why? You know, I'm always curious as to why. And I particularly come into the work with Black Women Radicals was that I was in a PhD program and at the illustrious Howard University, right? And there's nowhere else where you can major and minor in Black politics in a graduate program in the Department of Political Science than at Howard University. So I learned about all these amazing political scientists, Haynes Walton, Mac Jones, Ronald Walters, I can keep going down the line. But what I found that was missing in the syllabi and the conversations and even outside the classroom was Black women and gender expansive people at the vanguard of our movement building. So Howard is a very, like, there's so many Black women and gender expansive people that went to Howard, Polly Murray, Lucy Diggs Slow, Zora Neale Hurston taught there, Toni Morrison, all these different people, Cheryl Clark, a very renowned Black lesbian poet, right? And I could keep going down the line, and none of that was discussed. I actually found out that everyone says Ralph Bunche is the father of Black political science, and I learned on my own that it's Jula Marpresa, she's the mother of Black political science, right? So I got tired of that, the erasure, because if I'm not getting this, and I'm in a freaking PhD program, what a privilege that is. I teach. These students don't even know who Angela Davis is. They don't even know who Sada Shakur is. They don't even think that they're Black people in Germany, right? So this is what white supremacy and anti-Blackness has done to us. One, the diaspora wars, right? And then two, thinking that we have not been at the helm of movement building. And so I come into that work to disrupt that. I describe myself as a political and cultural custodian dedicated to the restitution and the restoration, right? And the reclaiming and centering of Black women and gender expansive people's stories. So I learned from Trinice and Nakisha, like all day, every day. I don't know what it's like to be a migrant. I don't know that, I don't have that experience. And so, and also like I'm dedicated to work in Brazil and other parts of the world because, you know, Brazil houses the largest Black population outside of Nigeria, right? So like, what are we doing when we're not including those stories in there? So I come to the work with humility, and like Nakisha said, that we're nothing but an iteration, right, of this work. And so, yeah, I'm just like, we gotta get these stories, y'all, because the archive is violent. The white supremacist archive is very violent. It has done complete damage, right?
Are you guys okay temperature-wise? Too hot? No, she has to-
I'll get a little airflow.
Uh-oh.
These things go.
What about you, Mom?
And what about you?
Yeah, well, I was gonna just bring us home. Sure, no, yeah, I can.
Okay, that's fine. Why do I do the work that I do?
Yeah.
I mean, I make stuff out of plastic for the most part.
Is that what you do? Yeah, okay.
No. Well, it's funny, I think that very similar to you, I noticed injustice at a very young age. And I met Dr. Georgia Drew, who wrote the book on post-traumatic slave syndrome when I was 10, and sort of became like her student / stalker at a young age because I was so moved by her, and her older brother was sort of like my father figure growing up at the time after my dad passed away. And I think I just became more and more aware of it, and being Persian was kind of this like a weird experience growing up in America because you're not Black and you're not white and you're not Hispanic or Latin. So you kind of fall in this weird place where you don't really feel like you belong to anything or anywhere. So a lot of my life I kind of struggled with this sense of belonging. And so I kind of like went towards the places that I felt, you know, like most like it. I tried to find most of myself in. And but injustice was always something that I noticed, especially I don't want to go that long, so I'm trying to after being around Joy for so long and still being around her, I thought to myself, like, okay, I'm going to dedicate myself to fighting for people's rights, disenfranchised women. And so I decided, I was like, well, the only way to really do that is law school. And so I worked sort of my entire adult life towards being a lawyer. And once I got there, I was like, oh my God, this is really depressing. I don't want to do this. I don't want to wear pantyhose. I don't like these people. And I worked in I did internships everywhere. I was on Capitol Hill, I was at the White House, I was at nonprofits, private firms, and it was always the same kind of thing. And I was like, I'm kind of depressed doing this. I can't wake up every day for the rest of my life. And so I kind of had a big dilemma, and I got really depressed, and I was like, it became my moment where I was like, I really have to find myself. And when I did do that, I kind of felt like I was abandoning the work. You know, I was like, how am I going to help people and help humanity and be noble if what I want to do is fashion where I just make stuff? Like, I'm contributing to so many negative things in the world. It's like excess waste, like who needs more, whatever. And it just kind of felt superficial. And at the time, especially, like I just knew fashion like from MTV or, you know, it was the most like the epitome of superficial to me at the time. But then what I realized, going back to what you said, Nakisha, about purpose, is that I think you can't really do anything unless you love it. Mm-hmm. And so when I figured out what I really love, like the one thing that I just love to do, it sort of created a path for everything else. So everything else that I was interested in, including social justice, and finding, doing all that stuff sort of filtered in the most unexpected, organic way. I wasn't even trying to do it, and it kind of incorporated its way into my sort of work. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes.
I feel like it's really important to figure out what you want to do, because without judging it for what it is, because you, with everything that's in you, will sort of flow you through it.
Wow, it's like so much of what you all are saying feels like it fits uniquely into like my response, like miraculously. Like Nakisha, when you kicked off, kind of making the reference with Jonah in the big well. I grew up Christian, but that's not the practice that I like am committed to. I practice Sheshe, which is an Ifa tradition from Yoruba people in West Africa, and something that we learn very clear when you start your path is about destiny. Right? And like you just making that, like it just shows you how faiths are actually so similar, right? In terms of structure and like purpose and like divine intervention. Because in Ifa, you, over your journey, right, and depending on your trajectory, like do you need to initiate? Will you be a practicing priest? Are you going to be a community person? We believe that everyone has destiny. So everyone has purpose. So there isn't anyone on this entire earth that does not have a destiny. Right? As long as you follow your destiny, your life will be successful based on what you selected. Right? We believe that we selected our destiny. Right? We also believe in like reincarnation as well. And just like hearing your story made me think of like all the times I've tried to run away from my destiny. And it's usually like my husband that's like, oh, you don't want to do this. It's really interesting. Also in the tradition is about, right? So he's always reminding me like, you can run if you want, but like you're only going to make your life harder for yourself. And it's so interesting to like just sit with all three of you and like listen to like what your journey has been and why you've done the work you do. But it's real, like it chooses you. And then it's almost like it feels like an addiction, and then almost like this is scary because it like won't leave me alone. Not everyone expects me to do this all the time, which is like kind of difficult, but also super important, right? And like how we move. So my work is in higher education primarily. I'm an organizer. I was an organizer before I even knew what that meant. I was always like, I don't like this, so I'm gonna get out my cousin just to do this. I don't want to do this. Right? Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sit here. We are about to go outside. I was always like shit starter, always getting in know how y'all do report cards, but in Florida, there's like A, you get like a grade and then a number for effort, like about your conduct, and then you have your conduct grade. And I'll get like 8 grade Fs. Or like B to C, like she talks too much. Like always talking in class, does not want to pay attention, opens books while teacher is talking. And I would be like, I am very bored. Right? Like, I would just be so bored sometimes in class, and it would just be like, this can't possibly be what school is about, because I am like deathly bored in school. So I learned that like education would be my thing in like a very like interesting way. And I work and teach at HBCUs. I graduated from the University, which is the only Black institution founded by a Black woman. And Dr. Mary McLeod is my soror and also someone who I hold deep in my heart. Because if it wasn't for her efforts, Bethune-Cookman or HBCU country, which y'all learn, like you see names like the Howard University, we say the great Bethune-Cookman University, right? Because she founded her institution with $1.50, 5 little girls with faith in God in 1904, right? At a time where like we couldn't even legally go to school still, right? Like we're not even hitting the 60s, right? In terms of segregation and making it accessible. You know, HBCUs were founded at a time when Black folks could not access an education. So here's this Black woman that's the youngest person of 12 children. Her parents are slaves, right? And like she doesn't have access to education until much later in life. And she's like, fuck it, I'm gonna go to school. And then I'm gonna create my own school. And the KKK is gonna come visit me every day. And I'm gonna post up outside and sing hymns with my little, like with these little girls, right? Like these defiant little girls, right? So like our institutions largely impacted my life, and I've only worked in this work with like out of since. I'm not saying that I always will, right? But what I'm saying is I think it's been really important in my trajectory because I worked like in her home and like went to that institution, that I knew that education would be like what I would have to do. And because I didn't like what my institution was doing, frankly, like HBCUs out of 103 we have left, only 5 with LGBTQ centers, 2 of which I built myself, right? So it's like, what are we saying when LGBTQ people are invisibilized at our institution? When everybody's gay.
Yeah.
Everyone's queer. I learned queerness from Black people, right? To be Black is to be queer, right? There's no separation, right? In how we see ourselves and understand ourselves. So my work is primarily at HBCUs, ensuring that marginalized folks have access to what they need, whether that's first generation college folks, LGBTQ students, folks on DACA, folks without status at all, international students, and Nakisha, what you said and what Jaimee said, and then like Melody kind of brought it back, was like, yo, you have to love the thing that you do. So I think that in 2020, when we were in the midst of uprising, which I remember, y'all was there, COVID, it was a ridiculous time to be alive, and some of us was like, oh, this is Armageddon, the revolution is here, right? Like this, because that's what it feels like, and that's what it continues to feel like in this moment. We were organizing locally in DC, and I had an opportunity to lead the Defend Black Women March. And this was 6 days after Toyin was murdered, right? This is post George Floyd, pre-Breonna Taylor, and a litany of other Black folks, right, that continue to be slain. And I think the moment I decided to take up my off-white belt, which is like one of my favorite pieces in like the history of streetwear, I really just was looking for somewhere to hold my machete. Frankly, that's what it was about. It was like, I can't walk down the street. They are gonna throw me in jail if I'm walking down the street with a machete. So like, I need to hold it, because in my tradition, and also like just, I think Black people and all across this world, a machete is a tool that we wield. It's not just for violence. It's like, it can be violent. It can get violent, right? But like, I also use this to cut the, my 80-year-old grandfather's still like chopping the trees. I'm like, God, sir, there are tools that we are using in 2022. He's like, you must get us. I'm like, I'm 88, like, it's not like necessary, but whatever. And when I took the moment to like put that piece on after I hit my altar with a really close friend of mine, shout out to Sam, or people know her as Juju Bay, we decided to pray. We were like, we're gonna do this march. And I didn't even think about fashion as like a possibility for me. It was like, am I creative? I was like, oh yeah, like I like things. And I make things work. And I create spaces, right, that don't exist. That's like my space in the world. And after I was talking on CNN, because the CNN reporter tried to like chop me up, and I didn't do that. They're like, they're saying you're calling for the defunding of the police. And what does that have to do with defending Black women? And I was like, well. So I ended up going off with a CNN reporter and it went viral. And then like Virgil Abloh slides in my DM hands, and I'm like, this is real. This is fam. This is not a real thing. Like, why would this man? He don't know me. Like, he doesn't care. And it was like the opposite. He followed my department's page, and that friendship changed my life. And I miss him. I miss him so much. Yeah, because he was like more than a mentor. He was a real friend. You know, that was like, yeah, you're an educator, and I know you like all this academic stuff, but you're creative. And I think that if you don't like spend time with that more, you're not going to be satisfied. So we like built all this cool shit together. You know, that like that's actually why I knew Melody, y'all. It was a virgin. So like he's really been like the gift that keeps on giving. And my long sob story is coming to a close. It's coming to a close now because what you said, Melody, about like doing what you love, I realized that like I'm not just, you know, a young fly, you know what I'm saying? We was hot girls for those of us from Florida, but we're city girls. Like hot girls and things. You know, like it's an embodiment. Like it's an embodiment. Like brass bangles up the arm, jelly sandals, what's good? Like, I was like, oh, what? You know what I'm saying? But like Virgil also helped me to curate and to craft and understand the power of fashion, right? And the tool and the vehicle. So now I would say like, yeah, I'm like this professor, organizer person, but also a creative director, right? Also a creative educator, because we understand fashion, right? This is political, right? Like Tony K. Lombardo says, the job, right, of an artist is to make the revolution irresistible, right? Like, so that's like what I embody. Anytime I want to work with anyone, which is why it was an honor to work with you, Melody, it was like, if number one must be fly. Like number one is the aesthetic is what draws the people. And people see themselves in a world that says, if you're poor, or if you don't have on a suit, or if you don't have degrees, or all these stupid things that we created, then you're not smart enough. Right? And what you have to say doesn't matter. And you don't know what you're talking about. And I think what fashion has a unique way of doing is like, fuck that. Like we're actually like streetwear is very revolutionary in itself. Right? Like the fact that the store exists on this street, what do y'all see over here? You don't see nothing else, right? Like that's by design. Right? So like thinking and hearing of your stories has made me like also been like, oh, what have I been running from? Right? And like how important is it for a community to exist? So thank y'all for that as we transition to the next part.
I know, like she over here like,
Wow, that was very, yeah. That was a lot, thank you.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
I think that that's such a beautiful testament to the fact that we can be many things at the same time.
So many things.
Because I feel like that was my thing. I was like, how am I going to be noble and change the world and be passionate at the same time? But it's like we need to reinvent those rules. Like, who made that? Who made that?
Exactly.
It's like you can be all the things at the same time.
Yes.
And it's okay.
And we must.
You must.
And we must.
Yeah.
I think it's an opportunity, to kind of take us into this next part of the next phase of our conversation. It's an opportunity for us to also look back and we've all talked about different points in our own personal stories or family lineages. But I mean, just looking at revolutions over time, movements over time, folks have always used fashion, whether it's to be intentionally dressed to the nines in your Sunday best, right? When you're taking to the street, Selma. So whatever it is, or if it's to be intentionally in your overalls and dungarees, sharecroppers, right? So fashion is, I think, intertwined through all that whether we're going to call it that or not, all that we've always been, particularly in this country. But then when you think about, I think, the diasporic connections, right? I think I really want us to bring our cultures. We kind of started to dabble at that a little bit, bring our cultures into this space, into the conversation. Particularly when we think about I want to bring also Central to March and our intentional focus on Brazil and Latin America and the Caribbean. And try to even answer some folks the question why, right?
Yes.
Like, a lot of us come to social movements, especially in this generation, through uprisings on U.S. soil, right? And we want to really, I think, understand the connection. And for me, that's all rooted in our culture. It's rooted in diasporic traditions. I think about my culture, right? Like I said before, my people are from the Caribbean, but I grew up in a Dominican household. For folks that don't know, Dominica is a teeny tiny island in what's it, the Eastern Caribbean? Don't hate me, Jersey folks. But it's a small island between slightly larger islands, Martinique and Guadeloupe, colonized by the French and the British, and probably some other folks inside of there. And so folks speak both, they speak a French Creole dialect, very similar to a Haitian Creole, and they speak English. Very proud of the Queen's English that they speak. But they also have, I think the thing that I was most enamored with as a child when I took with me was their dress. So our traditional dress is a derivative of African attire, so very big full skirts and petticoats and headdresses, and they tell your story, at least a piece of your story, particularly as a woman, before anyone ever meets you, right? So your headpiece determines, it lets people know if you're single, if you're married, like there's so many different things. As a kid, I lived for the ability to be able to put on the dress once a year. And to, to really be able to really live into my culture, because I was growing up in a space where I didn't have other people who were like me. I didn't grow up, often people always laugh at me. I need grits for the first time until I graduated from college. So I'm a Black girl in America around all these other Black people, and I feel a real kinship. But I grew up in that Caribbean home. So I ate porridge and cream of wheat. I ate saltfish for breakfast, not really pancakes. So I think our cultures, really matter. So I think grounded in your own culture, right? And sort of what brings you to this work, and how you see or how you've embodied the whole concept of to be in defiance, right? How does that live through, and how does your culture really put you in that space? And what are you carrying forward as a Black woman in defiance through your cultural traditions?
This is such a great question because as a Black, I don't want to say I'm a Black American, but a Black woman born and raised in the U.S., I don't know where I come from on the African continent. I was telling someone, we weren't even taught, we were just, in elementary school, it was like we were just slaves, not even enslaved. It was like we were just slaves and that was it. And so for me, I've been heard from other people that Black people born in the U.S. don't have culture, but we do. And we have a lot of culture. I see it in the way my grandma dresses for church, and I see the way the mothers wear white, and then we do communion, and I see it the way where my my dad presses his pants and just keeps himself together. Like we Black people generally, whether in the U.S. or just all over the world, we're the aesthetic of cool. We are the aesthetic, we are the embodiment of cool. And so for me, I will say having the opportunity to study and live abroad really broadened my horizons on what Blackness and ways of being can be. I just want to be frank, I'm the first and only person in my immediate family to travel abroad. I wouldn't have been able to go abroad at 19 if it wasn't for some sort of scholarship because I didn't have the money. And I went to Brazil. And I got real scared when I went because I'm like, there are Black folks here? These look like people from Broad and Cecil B. Moore in Philly asking me if I want a Lucy, and I'm too young to smoke at the time. And I'm in Brazil and I'm surrounded by all these Black people. And if it wasn't for that experience, I think that was another point that politicized me because I was like, wow, there are Black people everywhere, and this is what they're not teaching us, right? And so for me, seeing Black Brazilian women and gender expansive people being defined is so, it complements the Black feminist canon here, it complements the Black feminist canon in the Caribbean. So Marielle Franco was an Afro-Brazilian bisexual feminist politician and human rights defender who I greatly admired before she, her horrible assassination, but she was always at the vanguard of movement building in Rio de Janeiro and defending Black women in the favelas and queer folks and all sorts of people. And when she was assassinated, that did something to me. I remember where I was in Chicago, I was at a conference, and I'm like, this is not just happening to us here, it's happening to folks all around the world. And so for me to be in Brazil and like learn about Black Brazilian feminist thinkers like Lila Gonzalez and Jaimee Ribeiro and I mean Luisa Barrios and Marielle and like all these different Davidson Nascimento and all these different people, it showed me that we don't have to be in opposition to one another, right? And that Black people, Black women, and gender-extensive people in the U.S. were not the foremost thought on Black feminism. Yes. We're not the only thought on Black feminism, yes. Right? There's like, I want to embody what Marielle did and do politics in a different way. I want to do what Audre Lorde did when she went to Germany and create a community with like Black German women, right? And wanted to learn and sit at the feet of them and then go back her merry way. And so I think going abroad has like challenged me to not think that we're the only people that do this work. Like Angela Davis goes to Brazil and be like, why are you like loving me? You have Lila Gonzalez. Right? And so that's, to answer your question, that's coming to it. I'm gonna pass it off to you.
Yeah, I think for me, very similar, right? The first thing I can think of is like a culture influencing my friends would be many of the Maroons, which for me, I was like 3 years old, and you know, trying to get in the day, kind of public school. Shout out to y'all, we gotta do better, y'all. We gotta do better in how we do programming, right? When it comes to ethnic groups. Like there was like Harriet Tubman and like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, and like that was it for like 5 years, right? Like 5 years, it's like, are these the only people that exist in the entire world?
Rosa Parks.
Yeah, Rosa. Yeah, Rosa Parks, and like you wouldn't get a lot more than that, right? You wouldn't get more. And I would talk to my grandmother about it, and she taught me about Queen Anne, right? Who was the 17th and 18th century guerrilla warfare tactical strategist, and led us into revolution and into rebellion in Jamaica. And she kind of initiated and created what we now know as camouflage, right? Which if you think about it and see, you see all up and through streetwear, all up and through social movements, right? You will see camouflage. And it comes from like this is actually a warfare tactic of being able to blend in with the land to seize your enemy, right? And it's like this old like folk tale that we have in Jamaica about the red coats. And then like it refers to the British folks, right? Because you know, they would be in super colonial red uniforms and like singing marching in. But like we would be, when I say we, I'm talking about like my folks who are Jamaican and Maroons, would be like in the mountains, staged in with the trees, on the floor, jumping out, and like then we would just like bum rush them, right? And then they will always leave one person alive. Like we kill everybody, and we keep one person alive, so you can go and tell the story, right? About what happened to you when you ran up in here, right? The eastward, windward Maroons, or on the west side. And I think that like having that story and like having the knowledge of like camouflage, for me developed an affinity before it, like as a child, right? And like so when I would see like in the US, like this green military, and people would be like, this stands for US Army, and I'd be like, nah, that don't stand for US Army. Right? Like that's like Queen Anne, like she developed this as a warfare like tactic and strategy to ensure like liberation for people. And then like I become a Delta, right? And like so shout out to Omega Psi Phi, right? Like so like my brother's like, what? We wear like camouflage, right? And Omega Psi Phi has a different story, right? Like, you know, I can't share that information with you at this time. But what is so important, right? Like, what's so important to me about that is like the spirit of rebellion and revolution that relies in this piece of like cloth that like you might wear as cloth. I've seen like some iteration of camel right in front of me. It comes from like the power of a Black woman, right? Leading people into rebellion at a time where it felt impossible, right? So I think that would be the first thing. We see it all across like social movements. We talked about like the denim and the overalls, labor movements, right? Like mini skirts, earliest feminist movements, leather, all Black. We talked about like white, like in our tradition, like anything African traditional religion-wise, they're like, they go to people in white, right? Like, but that's just not us, that's all of us. Like white means like there's a power, right? It gets dirty quick, but you see it, right? It's the purity, it's the calmness, it's the peace, right? That comes with this particular color. So I'm seeing these cultural influences in like everything we do over time, and I think that like you talking about Marielle really just like grounds me again, like why are we here and why are we doing this? Because I went to Brazil in 2019 and had an opportunity to live and work in Bahia. It's like the black-ass place in Brazil. Like, y'all must go. It's the most beautiful, like one of the most beautiful places that have continued to politicize me. And I had been, like, I'm not from the US, right? So I know that there are Black people everywhere, right? But to see people like this look like my cousin, right here. Like I went to Brazil before I went to Nigeria, which now is like the second home for me. And just to see how, like, see my face in people's faces, and to walk by favelas, right? Walk by Ilays and temples, and like just Black people in the corner at the casino, fine, in the middle of the day. Like, where you headed at 2 p.m. in these heels, auntie? Like, where would you go on a Tuesday afternoon, dressed like this? It just was like, wow, like Blackness like transcends all. And you know, even though it's this very like U.S. concept, because like Black folks across the world and people of color generally, we don't necessarily identify with the United States kind of political referendum, right? Like we might identify more with the nation state term, like I'm Jamaican, so like you like, you're Black Jamaican. I need you to, because sometimes we have a interesting way of separating, right? Like and then there's like this war, like, well, I'm Eritrean. Are you a white Eritrean person? No, you are Black, right? With Eritrean descent. Right? Like, so I think it's like language is making me think of like culture and influence and like, what are the shifts, right, that have to happen? But I'm curious also to hear from you. Yeah, I'm like, what do you
I mean, I'm also really curious given the cultural influences being Persian, being in LA, it's also its own sort of melting pot. Yeah, how's that?
Yeah, it's so hard to pinpoint. Well, first I just want to say something that I think is so cool is when I first started making jewelry, I was just fascinated with all jewelry, like especially tribal jewelry, cultural, like ancient jewelry, and I would research all this stuff, and then you would see like these like beautiful beaded things from Kenya, and then at the same time you would see things from Native Americans, and then at the same time you would see things from Peruvians, and at the time none of them knew the other existed. And they were using the same colors, the same materials, and some of the same patterns. And so, to me, that was so dope because I was like, oh my God, we're all connected. We're all just picking up on that little wave, whatever that is, and we don't even know it. Like, they literally didn't know the other existed at that time, and we were making the same thing. So, I feel like that's such a beautiful thing in terms of like inspiration or you know, just like reflection of whatever time we're in, whatever materials we're using, whatever colors. For me, I mean, like I said, it was very strange for me because I kind of grew up in a very middle place. Like, I didn't really, I had a strong sense of my Iranian culture. Obviously, I grew up with Persian rugs and like certain things that it was just normal to me. But then I grew up around a lot of other things too, you know, so I had a lot of different influences in my life, and I think I went through different stages in my life. Like, there was definitely a period where you couldn't tell me otherwise, I thought I was a chola. Like, I had this firm eyebrows, it was, you know, and then I definitely went through a period where I was like, no, I'm a Black girl. You know, it was like, this is who I am, but it was confusing growing up in a place where you're kind of trying to find yourself. And so I think all these things sort of influenced me, and the place where I got to, or where I have been in most of my adult life, has not been so specific, but I think I've been trying to create something that isn't culturally referenced or doesn't have a reference. Like, what is the new thing that we're trying to bring forward that hasn't been brought forward yet? And so I think that's really my life's work. I don't think I've arrived to it by any means, but I think that's my goal is like, how do we create a culture that's our culture, not, because there's so many different cultures, not just race cultures, but cultures of survival, or cultures of, you know, there's so many different things that we subscribe to, and it's like, what are we trying to create that's new so that we don't repeat the stuff that keeps getting repeated over and over that doesn't serve us anymore. And so, I don't know, I think with my designs, that's what we're more so like what will support me today? Like what will I wear that will remind me of who I am and why I'm here? And like if I have to go into this meeting with like a room full of women, like how am I gonna feel like myself? Like so I don't have to compromise any part of me or be something different. So I feel like that's my goal. What can I put in here that might remind you of like your higher self, or like where, something that you're oriented towards, and it's more of a universal thing versus like a specific thing. Because I don't want you to reference something you already know. I want you to feel new. So I really feel like it's my life's work. It's what I'm always going to try to figure out or work on. And I think it's done through community, honestly. Like, I think that's how it comes about. It's like bringing in as many different people into the same time.
Yeah, that really resonates with me. I mean, particularly that piece around what am I going to put on or bring with me or even offer to others so that you feel like your most authentic self. Actually, most recently, since like I promised, I'll segue into the next question. Kind of, a little bit pre-pandemic, but definitely, in the pandemic, those we're still in it, y'all. So those first pandemic years, really got clear with myself about all of the ways that I was compromising self, right? And one of the ways that I really felt it was in appearance, right? So I live and work in Washington, D.C. I worked in these super white spaces, started my career really young for the field that I was in, formerly working in philanthropy, so Asian people making money, lots of money, and they're all suited up. And I look back and I was in my 20s, well, 23, 24 when I started. And I look back at those photos and I feel like I look awful. I have on these suits that I could have found in my auntie's closet, just this whole stuffiness. And I found that I was trying to be taken seriously, right? As a young person, as a woman, as a Black person, and then as a queer person, because in that whole time I was also hiding my queerness, right? And so for me, one of the ways that threw all these things out in the pandemic, it's just sort of revamped and really recommitted to one of my first loves of sneakers, right? So really just kind of and then coming back home to streetwear, that actually sneakers can go any and everywhere with me. So sneakers go with me to the White House when I go now. Sneakers go with me, much to the chagrin of many, respectable Black women, who look at me, there go this girl in her sneakers. And she's gonna be me in my sneakers, and I spend enough money on them that they should come with me everywhere. But that, so that's really, really resonated and helped me to, I think, just sort of reground, and being who you are allows you to be your best self.
Yes.
Right? So when you, really just get to recenter on who am I, and fashion allows us to do that.
Yes.
And has, to your point, gets a little bit of a bad rap, right, for all of the ways that it shows up. But what would it look like if we get to really reclaim fashion, right, for ourselves, for our movements, for our liberation? And that's what I think is, me personally, if I may, so dope about this collaboration. You know what I mean? I think we started to see more of it after, the more recent uprisings, but really being able to see designers, who have their own point of view and, are organizers or activists in their own right, really also partner with folks who are academia. So up here, you've got this really interesting mix of folks who are, in ivory towers and in the streets, meeting in community, but also really, I think, having our fingers on different, on the pulse of different pieces that I think really make up our movement. And out of that comes such a beautiful collaboration like this bracelet, right? That in its own way is a standalone piece that can honor Black women in defiance, but it also comes from a place literally generated from some other folks thinking around what it means to be in defiance. Yes. So that's where I really want to go
with this next question is if I could ask you all to draw out and almost define what does it mean for you in your life to be a woman in defiance, right? And how do you really see that coming alive? Anyone can start. It's hit me in my chest. That's a lot.
To be a woman in defiance to me is I guess I'm on this big tip of in my life, like, what am I doing this for? And like, if it's I've just been questioning that a lot. Like, if I'm not getting rest, if I'm not doing certain things, if I'm not prioritizing my health, what does this mean for me in my future? And I think being in defiance is like resisting against, and also like recognizing that I can't do everything and I can't do it all. And it's okay that Alice Walker has this quote like that says like it's okay to just be, and that is more than enough, right? And like to know that I can be still and I can still be loved and cherished and adored, and not because I produce, but because of who I am intrinsically. And I don't need anyone else to validate that, right? Like it's because of that's in defiance of white supremacy, that in capitalism, which tells me I have to produce in order to feel worthy. Yes. That is in defiance. I'm in defiance of white folks who don't think that I should be in this space or any space, right? But I'm still here right now, and you are never gonna get rid of us, right? Like we're gonna be here. I'm in defiance of patriarchal violence and norms that say that women, Black women, and gender expansive people always have to be 2 steps behind or some queendom status. I referenced the Combahee River Collective statement that says we don't want queendom status. We reject that. We want to be at the same level, right? And so I pushed back against transphobia and queerphobia, and I'm not queer, but it's my responsibility as a Black feminist, right? I think we get that twisted. Like it's our responsibility as Black feminists to stand up and be in solidarity with trans, queer, gender expansive folks who actually are many of the reasons why we're here today, particularly in our Black feminist movements. And so like to be in defiance is constantly like reassessing also that I don't know everything. I don't care if I have a PhD. Those folks don't know anything. They don't know absolutely nothing. Trust me, I see them, they don't know anything, right? And so I feel like it's like to be humble, right? And know that I don't, Eartha Kitt said something like my graveyard is the diploma, my grave is the diploma, right? And I feel that way. It's to constantly be humble and learn and listen and not to hoard and not to gatekeep. Right? Because a lot of times, like Black women and gender expansive folks get in these positions and they're like, oh, you can't work.
Yeah.
Sit with us. You can't sit with us.
Yes.
You know, we the mean girls now. And so being a Black woman in defiance is resisting co-optation, pacification, and also regurgitating white supremacist values, because we do it all the time. We do it to each other. And so that to me is what being in defiance means. It's like a constant state of assessment of all sorts of things. So I'll wrap that up because I just got a little.
I'm there for any time I'm here voting Eartha Kitt.
She was actually gifted, that was part of her design. I mean, she wasn't trying to do anything. That was her. She was born with that.
Yeah.
That's
Compromise?
Yeah.
I mean, it's really hard to follow you up, Jaimee. I'm like, this is nothing that you've said that I'm just like, yeah, and that too. And that too. It kind of just felt like a litany of like a scene from I like to box. So that's another movie. You know, so it kind of got me super like energized, right? To think about what it means to be in defiance. And I think I'm constantly trying to figure that out every day. Right? Like as I constantly try to figure out how to navigate my personal life, my organizing life, all these lives, right? Because we all are living in multiple ways each day. Like how we're showing up in this moment with you might not be how I show up like with my husband later. right? Or like when it's just me and Nakisha and Jaimee, or like when I might be selling Melody, like I'm selling, selling Melody text messages. Like when we're texting each other, right? Like we all get to show up differently, and I think that's also part of defiance. Like reminding yourself that I have the permission, like me, myself, Trinice McNally, to like be in my fullness, right? And like there was something I was writing about the other day. I think I posted it. It was like, oh, I'm super evil today. And I was like, oh, I actually feel super powerful today. Like the people that you're too much for are not your people.
Ooh.
Thank you. Thank you. Like they're just not your people. Like if you being around me makes you uncomfortable and it's not based on something that I have done to harm or offend you, I think you should sit with that.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's something about me that bothers you.
Yeah.
Because there's something about you that bothers you.
Yes.
Right? So like that, to me, that like being in that fullness instead of like constantly hiding my laugh.
Yeah.
Right? I remember when I was a kid and I had a gap growing up in Miami, it wasn't cool. Like it was not cool to have a gap. I didn't smile, or I like smile like this in all my pictures, so I just couldn't get down. How do you have a soft smile, James? I'm like, oh, jeez. Or I didn't smile at all. And I think that actually kind of created this like personality phenotype of like who I pretended to be for a long ass time. Like, so I don't have to, I'm very serious. This is a serious matter. These are all serious things. But like I do that in my entire life. And it's so exhausting. I'm sure it exhausts my partner. It's like, this shit ain't serious, dog. We eat chicken tonight. So I'm having chicken, or we having lamb, I have a meeting. He's like, I'm having whatever you cook, or I'm Ubering us some dinner. Like literally, it's not like this seriousness. Like that's for me. That's also like defiance is not just political, and then it is political because everything you do is political, right? Like where you live, what you enjoy, why you enjoy it, what you have access to. Like all of these things are not just things. They're a part of a system, right? And a system that works or works against you based on how you identify. So for me, being in defiance is being my most unapologetic, happy self in regards and with respect to other people, as long as my character is intact, as long as I have Eva Kelly, and you're a good character, that's a guiding principle in DeFi. Then anything else that you're holding, that's up to you to hold, my good man, right? Like that's up to you. And I think that that's also what it has meant. Because there's so many Black women and gender expansive people who we have like kind of curtailed around, or I'm gonna be a little silent. Even with other Black women, and you could be very real. It's actually been like Black women in some ways who have actually been like the harm doers in my life, or the gatekeepers in my life, or the upholders of anti-Blackness and respectability, as if like this is some type of mean girl society and I need to try to look like you. For what? Why would I want to do that when I look like me? Right? Like, why? Right? So like really intentionally undoing that, and like to be able to affirm someone else and compliment like, Jaimee, you look good as shit, though.
Well, girl, you said it. I was just like, you 50 shades of fine. Like you.
Right? Like in respect to others, in my own values. That's me being in defiance and like not toning it down because it makes someone else uncomfortable. Because then I actually miss my destiny. Because see, you were supposed to meet me. So you could be uncomfortable, so you can interrogate what the fuck is going on inside of you. So to me, that's what it means to be in defiance. Because it's your responsibility. Like there's been too many Black women in my family, to all of your stories. We've like had to tiptoe and be quiet and make sacrifices. Like for the sake of other children, right? For the sake of this, for the sake of that. And I think that's a really important question, Jaimee. Like, for the sake of what? Like, if I don't do this march, what will happen?
We talked a lot about this.
Right? Like, or if I do this march, or if I do this thing, what will it cost me?
Yes.
Right? And why am I willing to do that? For the sake of whom? Like, is the question. So to me, that's like what you said, this constant interrogation and like this constant like reckoning with self. Like, if I don't do this, in my life, that's my ultimate complaint. My husband's like, oh, you telling the truth, girl, it's about time, right? It's like, well, I did this. And he's like, because that's what you decided to do.
Yeah.
You have your own destiny. And I'm like, well, why won't people do it? He's like, because it's not their destiny, and obviously you know how to do it, which is why you're the person that is doing it. Right? So like, to me, that's also being in defiance. Like with all of the people who will look around and say, well, how come that they're doing this collaboration, or how come this is happening, or that is happening? It's the continuation to persist. Right, irregardless of, because for us, this is not about the fact that we're she wanted to do this with us, not for us. Right? It's a big difference, right? Like to do something with someone. That means it's a shared pursuit here. Right? And if we did not do that, perhaps I wouldn't get to meet all you lovely people, right? Perhaps someone may not have gotten something they needed, right? Or maybe someone needs to shift something, right? Like if you wouldn't have been able to hear this message, so like this honor, this reckoning of being a Defiance, I think is like what actually shifts our world.
Melody, if I could have you add our extra piece for you. That's also why this, so the collection is called, the collaboration, right? This bracelet is called Black Women in Defiance. Yeah. And so, yes, what does it mean to be in Defiance? But also, why is this special collaboration important to you?
Well, I was really thinking about it. I don't think I've ever met a woman not in Defiance.
Okay.
Like, do any of you feel like you're not defining something and we're still not equal?
Yeah.
We still don't have, we don't have the right to get an abortion anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, let's just keep going backwards, 2 steps forward, 10 steps back. I don't know if anybody that's not in like the 2% is not in defiance of something. We're so not there. And I think that that's exactly why this kind of thing is so important to me, because I really, truly believe that if women banded together, that we could do this together. And I feel like we're the only ones that can do it. And I feel like I love my brothers. I think they're completely capable, but I think it's our time. I feel like this era is more about the family. I don't know why, I just feel that way. And I feel like if we truly banded together, that we could turn this thing around. And I really feel like Black women are the lead of that. I do. I just feel like, spiritually speaking, I feel like the work has been being done by Black women for the longest. And I just feel like as a collective, it's who I want to follow. And so I think that that's really important. And I believe in all women, but I believe in different powers of different women. Like I'm really close to a lot of people, a lot of Native American women. And I'm like, anything that has to do with the land or with nature, like that's it all. Can you lead us, please? Like, that's your territory. And here I feel like it's Black women that are going to lead us to this change. And I hate to say that because I'm not trying to put pressure on you because you want to help you. I feel like the leaders are everybody else behind you. And I feel like it's more than allyship. It's community. It's relationship. It's not, I kind of hate that word ally. Because I feel like it's like, what does that really mean? It means like, I don't even know what it means. It means like, oh, it does. It feels like I'm doing you a favor.
Yes.
And it's like, in actuality, you're doing me a favor, and I'm just helping you get all of us there.
Yeah, but that's a perfect segue into like the last kind of questions that we'll have is about solidarity.
Yes.
And like, what does that mean to be in solidarity or co-conspirator for someone's liberation, for all of our liberation?
Yes.
Because like, I think there's a lot of performative buzzwords like ally and diversity, equity, inclusion. Like, do not hire me for DEI work. I'm a Black woman with a lived experience. I can't help you with the diversity, equity, inclusion part. Like, I can't, right? And so like, I'm interested in y'all's like understanding or like what y'all think it means to be in solidarity, like building solidarity and movement. Like, what does that mean to y'all, and what can we do to make that an actuality?
Can I respond to that real quick? As somebody who's been in the world for a long time, like, I've been able to observe a lot throughout my entire life. And I've been in rooms like when I was younger, when I would hear Black people like code switching. You know what it's called?
Yes, code switching.
Code switching. And I know they were. And I'd be like, oh, they don't trust me. And it made me realize that we can't move into each other's spaces on a surface level. We can't do that. Like, you have to come to my house for dinner. I want to come to your house to dinner. I want to know your grandma and know the stories. I want you to know mine. Like, it's not a partnership or a business transaction. It's like, I feel like we really have to be invested in each other's lives. Like, we have to build trust so that you allow me. Like, I know for the people I hire, I don't really let them do everything until I trust them. Like, I'm paying them, they're there to do the work. But I'll only give them so much work until they prove to me or I really trust them. And then I can be like, okay, take this. And I feel like with building, movement building, or doing anything, it has to be the same. It has to be trusted. And I don't think that can happen unless there's genuine love and like relationship, friendship there. It can't just be we're helping each other towards this goal. With some people it can be, but I don't know. I mean, that's a question I try to answer myself a lot. But from somebody that's on the outside of it, I just feel like it truly needs to be deeper than what it is.
Trust.
Trust.
Community building. What do y'all think? Because I think that's a great segue. Like, how does one build trust and how does one build that side of it? Well, Nakisha's like, right?
But no, it really does dovetail off of what Melody was saying. I think it's relationships, right? So, I always tell folks, no matter what my current title may be, that I'm an organizer, right? I'm an organizer first and foremost. I'm an organizer for people, the resources, what have you. And for me, organizing is about building relationships, right? We always talk about meeting people where they are, and I think that's, yes, the first step. But when you get there, right, when you meet them, what goes down, right? And I think oftentimes when we get to that meeting point, we think that's just the jumping off point. Oh, let's now like fly together. And it's like, hold up, like, wait a minute. I need to see, like, can you hold me, right? Can you hold the space around me? And that's my whole work is about creating safety, right? So I often say that yes, the work is ending gender-based violence, but for me, I like to flip it and say that the work is actually around creating safe living conditions for all of us, right? Creating safety. And so for me, that's where solidarity is going to come into play. That's, where trust is going to come into play. I also do believe, to be quite frank, that trust is a choice. Trust, like love, is a choice. So I can show up here today and say that I trust you and that I love you. And we'll have to work into that, right? And there'll have to be tangible examples, right? And I will feel you and you will feel me, and we'll come back from that, and then we'll even further deepen our love and our trust for each other. But if I just choose not to trust, and I've been in that space in my life where I'm just walking through and it's me, I've got me, and I have a lot of examples. I have a lot of receipts. The evidence is there that I can't trust people. But I also get to choose what life I want, right? And create new evidence, right? So there was more to be created. And I think that's what I'm looking for with people in movement. And movement transcends, I think the mechanisms. But it's that I choose to love y'all. And, we go through craziness. And that's how I know it's real. Yeah. That's how I know it's real, that we still here. Yeah. And we're still fighting together for something bigger than all of us.
I don't know, I have to say this, but when you was like, pull me down, it reminded me of Bow Wow. Let me hold you.
Don't hold me down like Bow Wow. I'm sorry, I just wanted to do it when you were real serious. It's like, okay, let me stop. Forgive me. Bow Wow.
No, it is definitely a choice. It's like, are we gonna do this or not?
Yeah.
Like, are you gonna, it's not just even about like, are you gonna be an ally, but are you going to like speak up about injustice and not just put a black an Instagram post and be like, I just did, whatever, and I just made this post and that was it.
And I gotta be consistent. Consistency is key.
Yeah.
All the time.
Yes. What do you think, Trinice?
It feels like, I feel like you all have covered like this, making the connections between like
doesn't mean that things will be great, right? Love means that I'm giving you the ability to like love me or hurt me if things are great or not, right? Like that is love, that is trust, right? That we can either work into trust, we can build trust, and there's an expectation here, right? And so it's made me think about like when folks are like, I have no expectations of people. You know, you're in the kitchen, somebody went to the baby shower, I asked Keisha to bring wings. Keisha's habitually late. Why would you ask her to do that? I'm thinking about my aunt. I hope you're watching. She was like, I know expectations, and I think that's where we go wrong. And that's what solidarity is. Like, there are expectations here. Yeah. I absolutely have expectations about the relationships that I'm in, right? And I think that that's how we should go into relationships. There's an expectation that if something goes wrong, someone is feeling away, and you're like, I don't even know what that means. It's like, you feeling away? What is that way? Like, what does that even mean? Right? It doesn't matter what the conflict is. It doesn't matter what we're fighting against. That like we can be in principle disagreement, right, or agreement because of our values, right? So I think that solidarity looks number one like shared values and like commitment to curiosity. I think we should all be more curious. Make less assumptions. Like just make very little assumptions about people because you'll almost always be wrong. Almost always. Like you don't know a person until you know them. And when can you actually say that? Like think about the relationships in your life. Like you thought you knew your mom, but then you find something, you're like, well, girl, like I have no idea, right? Like because you know your mom. You may not know Paulette. Like you know what I'm saying? Like I don't know every part of this person because that is gained, that is earned, and that is trusted because we all show it in different ways. Yeah. So I think that solidarity is like all the things y'all have mentioned so far, and there's an expectation here that you are going to show up for people that don't look like you, because we share the same values. Yeah. So off of GP, I expect more than a post. I expect action. Yes. Right? Like it's not enough to just post like defend Black women. Like, have you even been to the website? Have you even read the resources? Right? Like the labor that it takes to create this is not like because we want to do something cool. It's because we absolutely must do this. Because like too many Black women and gender expansive people like are being murdered every day all across the world. That don't sound serious to you? You know what I mean? Like I want you to be compelled. That's what solidarity means. Like being compelled to be involved in an action that shifts or changes material conditions. Right? And that has to come from your heart. You know, I think this is really hard work. This is like, what are really your values? And we can't afford to keep saying that's not my business. Yes. It's absolutely your business. You know, like it's absolutely, there's some things that are really none of your business. It's maybe like there's some things, but most things, when you think about people being violated and harmed, that's your business as a human being, right? Irregardless of your skin color, your sexual orientation, your gender identity, your immigration status, how much money you have in the bank. And I especially want you, those who have a lot of money in the bank, right? To feel compelled to do something, not because you necessarily owe someone anything, but because you're a human and you believe that people should have access to what they need, like period, full stop. Like that's it. And I think that that's what solidarity calls for, the expectation, right? The exchange that must happen, the interrogation that you must do of your own values, right? And I'm not saying that means that like Black women and gender expansive people, like we're not removed from this conversation, like by any means, right? Like I'm not saying that everyone else needs to do this and we need to, no, it's gonna take all of us actually, right? We're actually gonna have to model that. Right, we're gonna have to model and think about like how am I showing up? How am I not showing up? And then I can just do better because this is not about shame. Shame is not a helpful feeling. It's not a helpful emotion. I don't even know why it was created. I'm like, God, why still? You have shame, right? I understand what guilt can motivate people to act, to think, or reflect, but shame literally is not helpful. We literally just like we can wallow. It's so powerful, shame. Like, and I don't want to use shame as a tool to politicize and mobilize people. I would much rather use love and expectation and care and like kindness and like, you know, meeting each other. So I think those would be the things to be like, we need to have more expectations of each other. Yeah. And we can do that in real time. We can do that right now. Like I can meet one of y'all, we can exchange numbers and be like, yeah, like you're so cool, let's talk one day. That's what happened with Melody. And Melody's like, yeah, hit me up. And hello, up, Melody? Star, right? Like, that's she's like, yeah, let's get a meeting. Like, to me, that is solidarity in action, because people don't have to do things because they owe you. People feel compelled to do things because they want to change the world.
Yeah.
Right? That's a display of values. Right? Like, this is what this person's values are, not like, I feel guilty. So like, nothing good comes from that. For especially those of us who have had romantic relationships, what does that usually breed? Resentment. Right? Because it's like, I did this for you. And you won't. And it's like, so you shouldn't have did it. Right? It's like, if me doing it for you only meant that I was expecting you to do it for me, then maybe I didn't do it for the right reason. And maybe it's coming from a place of trauma, right? Or a place of guilt. You know? So I think that those are the things to think about. Like, what's the expectations? I expect you to talk to me if this happens. Or I would like you to connect with me if this happens. I would like this to be a relationship. I don't know what that looks like, but let's figure it out.
Yeah, and I will like just say this before we wrap up. Like, I think it also takes decolonizing what we thought we know, like decolonizing our education. For example, I co-founded the Black and Asian Feminist Solidarities Project, a project between Black radicals and the Asian American Feminist Collective. And I was compelled to do that because Erica Huggins, former political prisoner and leader of the Black Panther Party, was like, and also Barbara Smith of the Combahee River Collective was like, you know, have you thought about, you know, building solidarity outside of just like Black women and gender expansive people? And I was like, no. Right? Because oftentimes, like, I will say that when it comes to solidarity, it's like Black women, even though it's women of color. I'm not a woman of color, I'm a Black woman. Right? I must be really honest and frank about that. But it's always us doing everything and feeling like we're not getting the support. So they compelled me and pushed me. And I love the work of the Asian American Feminist Collective. And we have this project together. And it's like finding the similarities. For example, Myrna Mac Chang was a Guatemalan Chinese like anthropology and human rights defender that was assassinated right during the Guatemalan Civil War. That connects to Maria Franco. That connects to Emilissa Moyano, who was an Afro-Colombian land rights activist who was assassinated. It connects to all these different things. And even with the hate crimes we're seeing against Asian Americans, Asian and Pacific Islanders, like how does this connect, right? Like what are the differences? And yeah, we have a lot of problems, but we also have a lot of shared histories, right? And so like I think it's like decolonizing what we think we know and to like be open to learn like, wow, like we actually have these shared backgrounds and yet we're different, but let's work on this, you know? And so segue into this,
We'll offer Melody to open us up to talk a little bit about the youth environment.
I'm supposed to do that? It's so funny because at the beginning I was like, you guys are a really bad public speaker. I'm very shy. My voice is very small. And then I just keep playing. I don't know if I'm well equipped to do it justice.
Well, I mean, if you just want us to open, you know, so we can open it up and talk about it a little bit.
Yes, please.
No.
Please.
Sure. All right, y'all. So we're hosting the second annual Defend Black Women March. Like a lot of us have alluded to, this is in honor of Maria Franco, Black women and gender expansive people from Latin America, the Caribbean, and the global South, really, right across the diaspora. I'll talk to you a little bit about what the first march was, but something that Jaimee and I realized after doing the I Support Black Women campaign, something that I didn't even realize that was something that connected me to Nakisha. She was my boss, y'all. Like 6-7 years ago, she was like, I don't need to.
My age.
Because it was so important to me, right? Like, it was a very like interesting like working scenario that I didn't actually realize like what this person would like mean to me, right? So that's like the power of like expectation and like camaraderie and care. Like I think that you model that really, really well. I love you too. And this march is literally about everything that we're doing here and then more. What does it look like to disrupt these silos of thinking that like US-born folks, US-born feminisms in particular, are the owners, right? The custodians of like this tradition, this praxis, and so many things. Because we're not. We're not doing anything new, like to be very clear. And we have a lot to learn from those of us that not only are from across borders, but those of us that still live there. So this march is about bringing all of that together and really centering and amplifying the voices of folks, being impacted right now by much more vulnerable conditions, y'all. And this is not a pivot the U.S. against anyone, because we've actually seen white supremacy and anti-blackness be the best teacher about how to do that, right? That's not what this march is about. It's thinking about what happens when people take time to learn more about Maria Franco, right? Many of them are maroons, right? Like, what does it look like when we can actually have conversations about people we have no idea exist, and like really call on their lives, because they're the one that provides the motivation, right? There are names of people, of us in this room, from our ancestors, from people of our villages, from hundreds and hundreds of years ago, right? Like, regardless of what your skin color is, and I'm talking to all of you, that you'll never know their name. Do you realize that, like, you will never know the name, perhaps of like some eighth generation, let's say you belong to the monarchy. That's great for you. Y'all are wonderful workers with that, right? But it doesn't look like any of us in this room, right? So there's a responsibility with that. And as a practitioner, as an Oshun priest in particular, like, defending Black women means like honoring the responsibility of what it means to push back when shit is not in favor of those who need it the most, right? And that's what this march is about. When we get clear about who Maria Franco was, and think about what's happening in Latin America, and think about what's happening in the Caribbean, hopefully it will move us to do more work, right? Hopefully it will move us to have more important conversations with our neighbors. Y'all live in LA. This is one of the most diverse places in the entire world. I was like, babe, like, we're in little Ethiopia. I didn't even know it was little Ethiopia. Like, it's so like magical to me, and like also so sad that like we literally are diversity and inclusion. Look at my job title is called diversity and inclusion. I still don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I'm like, now we're gonna move to social. We're gonna move to social justice. I know that sounds hard for you, right? But if that's what I have to do to meet you where your episode will do. So I really want y'all to see that this march is not just about Maria Franco, but what would be wrong with that if it was? And that is an interrogation that I want folks to like really think about. What does it mean to honor an Afro-Brazilian lesbian politician, right? Also practitioner, a poor woman, right? What does it mean to like honor this person's life and their work, not just their death? Yeah. And what about that makes you so uncomfortable, right? Like there's something there. And I think this march is about bringing us together, not only to honor their lives, but to think about the lives that we don't spend time thinking about in our everyday communities, right? Like, this is not just about fancy words in academia. This is about what does it mean to be in conversation and relationship and learn the stories and get the lessons that will like inform policy, right? That will inform culture movements, that will inform everything else to make a change in the world. And that's what this march is about.
Yeah, and I just really quickly want to give some stats about Brazil, right? Brazil was the last country in the Western Hemisphere to abolish slavery in 1888, right? It also had one of the largest maroon or quilombos, Zumbi dos Palmares and Dandara dos Palmares had this huge resistance of the Portuguese, right, with this quilombo. Has one of the highest rates of anti-Black state violence in the world, has the highest rates of anti-trans deaths, with the majority of these deaths, 82% of Black, trans, and travesti women, right? And also 2 high rates, the 5th for feminicide, right? What can we learn about what's going on in Brazil and like their resistance strategies and learn so we can talk about what's happening here, right? Everyone's talking about abolition. Well, both been practicing abolition for a long time. Felipe Gialli was the one that led the resistance movements in Bahia, right? And so it's like, how can we take these names and learn from one another, right? Because state violence, anti-Blackness, Roe v. Wade, and all these reproductive injustices are not just happening here. They have implications for the whole entire world, right? And there's different conditions, material conditions people suffer through. So I want us to think about that and think about even Colombia has the 2nd largest Black population in Latin America. What does that look like for folks, y'all Caribbean teams over here, guys? What does this mean? And so we can learn from one another and our plights here, right? And so that's what this march is about. Hope y'all can check it out, defendblackwomen.net. Listen, July 29th through the 31st, the march is on the 30th of July, Saturday. We're gonna start at Malcolm X Park and go to Black Lives Matter Plaza. So please, y'all, just thank y'all for your support. We got the charm braid, we didn't talk about really the charm braid, but I want Nakisha to say something too.
Well, just one more thing on the march. I think it's also about, tearing down borders. I think borders are made up. And so, I think we get an opportunity to really flip this thing on its head. So rather than, so why Maria Franco, why Brazil, why the Caribbean, why borders, right? And let's just think of ourselves as, not necessarily border crossers, but citizens of the world, right? We know that, to me, borders are white supremacist creation. And so to defend Black women is to defend ourselves, and to defend the belief, right, that we belong wherever we are, and that is really our right. So I think there's a real opportunity. I see it as a call to action. Y'all, it's not a slogan. The team is tired of me saying that, but I really mean it. It's not just a hashtag. While we've seen amazing movements born out of hashtags, we don't really believe that we are going to hashtag our way out of white supremacy or patriarchal violence. And so we call y'all to come be with us, to throw down with us, so that we really can, I think make this thing come alive. I do have to say before we close out, and I hope that at least each of you, shouts out at least one person on the bracelet that means something to you. I, always introduce myself as a Black lesbian feminist, and so for me, of all the people on the bracelet, there's so many that I love and adore. When I think about someone who really lived their entire lives in defiance from beginning to end, and is still living through so many of us, it's Audre Lorde. She for me is like, I think she's like an auntie. Even though we never got to meet, but really being someone who's from the Caribbean and really had to find herself and find her sexuality and define herself at different times and meandering this thing called life. Really always saying, I get to be here, I get to take up space and created space for others, right? So for me, she's so much of a guiding light and someone that I'm really honored that now will get to be able to have on me all the time. So thank you for creating space for Audre, as I believe that she created and continues to create for so many of us.
Yeah. The Afro-Petty, So mine is Lila Gonzalez, of course, Afro-Brazilian feminist anthropologist. She actually wrote this piece called Nanny, Pilar da Africanidade. She came up with this theory of centering Black and indigenous women in Latin America. That's what Africanidade represents, right? And then she talks about Nanny's roots in this essay. And so it's like her diaspora, when she went and met Angela Davis, she went to Baltimore, she traveled to like everywhere. And so like her diasporic solidarity was like, yeah, I'm just, even in her death, she passed away a long time ago, she's still a figure in my life. And so yeah, I'll just say Lila Gonzalez.
I think I already shared Mary McCall with them, because I feel like she's a very underrepresented figure, and people only highlight her civil rights work, her education work, but she was so much more, y'all, especially in terms of a transnational organizer. Most of what she learned was also on the continent, right, that she brought back, and her whole entire life was in defiance, from the relationships that she built down to us even having an institution that is still here and still thriving. So I feel like I shared her, so I'm just kind of overstepping. Add one more, which is Ann Lowe, a Black U.S.-born designer who, frankly, was one of Christian Dior's archetypes, right? That he actually looked up to her in a lot of her work, and a lot of us don't know who she is. And when I learned about her, when I started, I'm taking classes at Parson in streetwear right now. I have no idea what I'm doing, but Virgil was like, you should do the thing. And I was like, nah, I don't really think that's me. So I'm like, all right, it's me. I'm gonna do it. I'm taking classes because I love learning. They've been talking about Ann Lowe and her work, and she's really famous for the Jackie Kennedy dress, where folks were actually asking her who made her dress. She refused to identify her by name and said it was a colored woman that designed her dress. She actually learned, how to sew because her grandmother was known to make dresses on plantations, right? And then her mother took up that work, and then her mother died, and then she decided to get into this family business, and she got to a couple of designer luxury stores in New York where she went to school. But I wanted to offer her name, especially in honor of who we are and what's happening. That is largely because of her work that we can even create a collaboration like this.
Well, first, I want to thank you guys because there's so many women. When we were first talking about what women they wanted to see on this bracelet, I think we got a list of.
Wow!
Yeah, it was 50 women, and I was like, oh my God. And I didn't recognize a lot of the names on the list. And so for me, it was such a privilege to be educated by you guys about a lot of these women, and I hope that a lot of you are educated about some of them that are on this chart, and then hopefully you guys could continue to honor more, or maybe we can do something else where because there's so many, we could just go on and on and on forever. But mine was Anlo. I love how you covered her. But I also really love Billie Holiday. I mean, I think just as an artist, you know, she was raped at a super young age, and then she was turning tricks by the time she was like 13, 14. And she was just able to accomplish so much despite everything. And I feel like she's the greatest pop singer of all time and only sang within 1 octave, which is crazy. 1 octave. Like Stevie Wonder sings in 5 octaves. Like just do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do is the only octave she ever sang in, and greatest of all time. And that just blows me away. But it's also, for me, such a mirror of her life. Like she was given, you know, it's almost like she was given 8 notes, and she still is the best. Forever. Like we'll never forget her. So she's really special.
Well, thank y'all so much. We can take a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Folks in the room.
Thank you both so much. This has been church for me, so this has been such a good talk. But y'all were talking a little bit about gatekeeping earlier, and I do think that it is not just joyous and soul-filling when you go anywhere in the world and you see other Black people and Black and gender-expensive people, and you meet them, and it's just like you're looking at yourself or you're looking at one of your relatives, and you feel that connection. But at the same time, we also talked about how all kids will be pinball, and there's a reason that Harry carries a pistol. So you can't necessarily take everyone with you. And how do you guys navigate that when you're building these movements and organizing? Because it's not even just necessarily our own people, but there's the infiltrators who will try to basically co-opt Blackness and sell it right back to us. That kind of stuff. So what do you guys think about that? Actually navigating meaningful movements and meaningful solidarity.
Ooh, you went there.
Yeah, I went
there. You went
Okay.
there.
First question.
I'll take them there, yes. One thing I learned doing like ethnographic research, like while in Bahia, is that like I can't assume a fictive kinship with everybody. So just because someone looks Black doesn't mean like I automatically have this like relationship with them because I'm Black. Like I'm looked at as an American when I go to Brazil, and rightfully so. We're like, oh, you got money. He got money. Like what's her name? Right? You know, and I think that's been a humbling fact. A humbling experience because like I've interviewed several Black feminist activists in Bahia, and they're like, well, don't assume things. Like just because you read this doesn't mean you know my life. Yes. And I was like, ooh, right? And also too, I think it's important that like we've come across, and Trinice, we've talked about this, a lot of Black women and gender expansive folks who choose to actively say that they're Black feminists, but actively wield violence against and bully other Black women and gender expansive people because they become movement imperialists, right? They become the bullies, like the mean people, the mean girls, and the mean folks, I would say. And I think it takes for me, it's like a discernment. Like if something is not right and something feels off, but sometimes you can't always go on your own sensibilities, right? But then like if you're seeing a pattern, I would say, because there's a difference. People want to throw out these terms like hate, like what is it, conflict, harm, and violence, right? But like just because I don't like you doesn't mean that I committed harm against you. I just don't like you. But I still can actively fight for our liberation together. But I think you have to like look at a sustained pattern of harm and like really interrogate that, because there are people that genuinely do not mean as well that look like us. Yeah. Like I'm talking about genuinely will sabotage, will destroy, will slime your name, will do all sorts of things. And I think it takes an introspection of like, okay, like sitting down with that, but also like not just taking everything face value, right? I think that's how a lot of our movements got infiltrated generally. Like when you think about the Black Panther Party, it was like everybody coming in, right? You don't want to gatekeep, but you don't want to surveil, but you also want to take into account like
is this person doing this to somebody else? Or, because, folks talk, and so is it just me? So I think that would be my word of advice, really I don't want to say be cautious, but not assume everyone, you have a relationship with everyone because we're Black, and this fictive kinship. And also, like Trinice said, Blackness looks different across borders, across borders, right? What does that mean? So that would be my offering. That's a hard one.
Can I say something? I also feel like in my spiritual side is that we're more than this too. It's like we feel things before we even talk to a person. And so I think realizing that we also exist on the soul level or whatever you want to call it, and honoring that. If your intuition sparks up with whatever, because with the topic of this in particular, white supremacy is such a deeply rooted construct that a lot of Black women, unfortunately, do carry the mark of the oppressor. But maybe it's because of survival. It's not a judgment. You can't judge and say oh, whatever. It's because maybe it's the only way that they know how to survive. It's if you can't be in joints. So it's you can have, you could be we have nothing to build together, but we could still build parallel. But just honoring that soul aspect and being or listening to it, despite what's on the outside sometimes.
Yeah, for me, it's continued to become discernment and not just what do people have to say about this person. It depends on who you're asking, right? What their relationship is to that person, and I think there's always more in a story. So discernment for me, just as a priest, right? So I have access to tools and I ask questions. I don't engage in relationships or friendships without knowing what I'm walking into, right? There isn't a person that is close to me that I don't know where they really stand. And that is a very difficult thing. It's a very draining thing, but it's also a thing that it is put here for a reason, right? And I'm not saying that is the only way. Intuition, the gut doesn't lie. The body doesn't lie, right? About what you feel. And then also projection is a real thing too. And I have to say that, right? Because just because you think it, right? Parts of that is true, but what is the relationship to the truth is the thing I want to interrogate for us. Because we often project based on our own lived experiences. So I think how I've been navigating is number one, I have connection with my Orisha, right? That is my spiritual practice that I do. My friends tell me sick of it. I'm girl, I gotta get divination, I gotta divine. Because I don't know about this person. Or I know and I want the confirmation that you are exactly who you say you're not. Right? So that's my first thing. Relying and also checking on people that I trust to get their opinions. Even if that means that I might get a little dragged in there. Right? That's the trust of the friendship. You seem really drained, maybe you shouldn't take this meeting. I'm okay, Jaimee, you're right. But we can't say Nakisha, okay, I hear what you're saying, right? But also, right, it's do you have the trust? Because you cannot be your only bearer of critique, feedback, and affirmation. Right? So it's I don't take compliments or that I hold too dear from people that I don't trust. I just say thank you and I appreciate it, right? Because you didn't have to say that to me. But I also hold critique stronger from people that I do trust. Because I know that it's rooted in love. I don't hold critique with people who are unqualified. There are people who are not qualified to offer me critique. Not because I'm so wonderful, right? Because you and me are not the same. And that means that we don't share the same values. Literally at base level. This is not about degrees or any of the other foolishness. So that's how I navigate, right? Are you qualified to even this critique? Are we rooted in the same thing? Do we care? Because that will show me if this is rooted in love or not, right? Or rooted in our people. So that's how I had to make decisions. And it's very difficult and challenging, and then it's also beautiful to see who's here when it all burns down. Right? Those are your people. Those are the people that do the critique, do the wins, and do the many L's that y'all will take. Are they still there? And how are we doing? Am I the only one doing well? That's another way to assess. People that are constantly asking for things or want to be in relationship when things are well. Right? Or if I'm the only friend that's doing well. That's a sign that person is only concerned about themselves, right? So how do we all get to win? It's like what I think should be the thing that navigates. What is that? Does that person ask me how I'm doing before a meeting starts? Do we have time to just say, how you doing, Killer Kells? Right? Like that's how our relationship like continue to manifest within like this collaboration. Like we all met each other for the first time in person today, but we've been knowing each other because we made the effort to be in a relationship. So that's why our discernment continues to this day. That's why this collaboration is going to be possible. Because the whole thing is we don't even see each other. So I think that those are the ways you can tell. How do we act? How do we treat each other on a regular day without talking about politics or anything work related? How do you treat me? How do you make me feel? If it's not good, that's a sign. Yeah, it's a sign.
He's another hand somewhere.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
First off, I just want to thank you all because I was sitting over here fiercely taking notes, and I know that that's a good sign of progress on momentum and nation building. My name is Kika, and I'm mother opening the first Black women dispensary in Los Angeles.
Wow.
And as we were talking, one thing that just continues to stand out is the Kendrick video, the Heart Archive, and I remember watching it, and I know so many of us just wept. And it was seeing our brothers be able to advocate for each other in the most least popular opinions across the board. And in that moment, I thought of our sisters, and I thought of what's happening with the true scholars in this country. Our sister, who has fought for us. And I think there was Sister Nahanda Obiodun in Cuba. We know Amasada. But Sister Nahanda passed away with a lot of pain and sickness from devoting herself to the movement. And so as we continue to carry that torch, all of us in this room, and stand in the least popular opinions for the sake of our people and for the sake of our ancestors, the question comes into case. When you say that we're sitting out of this one, or for the sake of my peace or my mental health, or for the sake of my physical health, I might not be able to stand up the next time if I don't sit down right now. So I would be curious to hear from your perspectives when you've taken those moments of pause, or how you support each other in community with being not just a singular, but being a group, being a collective. How do you show up for each other in those moments?
Listen, you got me like, you're reading us right now.
You're
dragging.
You're
Drag is a drag, yes. Drag.
I was like, oh, I need to be in time.
So I'll say, wow, these two do a wonderful job of checking me, right? Because we do. Very lovingly. But I catch it. No, well, because my response to this work, I've just been in this, I really feel it as my life, that when it gets hard, when it gets tough, and I think, Trinice has alluded to this a little bit today already, but the hardest parts for me are when there's resistance, or there's conflict, or some kind of messiness that comes from other Black women, right? Because I'm like, this is who I'm doing this for. Or there's not the showing up, right? Because there's people who I expect not to show up, but then there's to me that we have expectations. And so my gut reaction is to just go even deeper, right? Go even harder, and to try to fill in the gaps where other people should be that have fallen off, right? Or have not shown up. And they remind me that it comes at a cost, right? So I've been around a little bit longer, and so I've said, well, this is how, this is my experience, or there's something that we're questioning. Why are we in this moment? Why are we holding so much for ourselves? There's so many other people, and let's stop, right? Or let's pause. And then I think forward into the impacts that I know this will have, that I just feel so deeply in my bones, and I'm like, we just keep going, because there are other people that will be impacted. Like, there are real lives out there. And then the reality is, though, that it can come at the expense of your own, right? And so I remember one time, they may not remember this, but I remember in one of these calls, they said to me, and I was like, well, this, keep going and people will show up and it'll turn out. And they said, well, what has that cost you? Right? And I was like, I've been down this road before, right? Like, I know it's gonna work out. And like, trust me, the people will come because it's gonna be so dope. And they're like, I'm like, all right, this time, and I'm like counting the times. And they're like, yeah, what did that do to you? And that was like a gut punch because I've had real physical health challenges, had pulmonary embolism, like literally clots through my body, almost dead. And most of the folks, doing the work for and with weren't there, right? And so they actually, held up a mirror to me and were like, yeah, so now how are you gonna go about the work? And like, how are we gonna be different in it, right? So I think it's one, it's really an answer, except that, particularly in this moment where we're in the midst of a global health crisis, if anything, reminds us of anything, it's that we do get to care for ourselves and for each other, physically, right? Emotionally, mentally, spiritually, right? So before we, we get outside, we take to the street, we get online, and what have you, I just say that this opportunity, this moment is an opportunity to remember to care for yourselves, right? Like, and to really, do what it takes, right? And part of that is saying to each other, like, you get to sit down, right? So you sit down right now, and like, I'll stand watch, right? That's what we're doing. I watch a lot of MTV. I'm MTV baby, so to lighten this up a little bit, I was like, I love the challenge. And when they get to the finals, it's usually like a thing, and you're in pairs, and sometimes it's like stand on this block and like be up all night, right? And the way to survive it is that you guys have to take turns, right? Like, you sleep now, while I go, and then we'll have that energy for later. And so something that I really am calling forth into our movement space, particularly for Black women, is really that solidarity of action, right? Co-holding our spaces and our movements and being so in sync with each other that we know when it's our time to stand, when we know it's our time to toil, to be in the work, and we know when it's our time to say, sleep, you can be on time. You know what I mean? That it becomes so synergistic. And then I think in that, in the creation of that, then the tug and pull it'll dissipate. It will have to dissipate.
That's beautiful. I don't know. I'll just say one simple thing. My mom is always saying to me, if you don't get a hold of this right now, you won't. You're going to be gone, and somebody else is going to come by, and your name will just be a memory, right? Like, I can't do the work if I'm not alive. And I haven't found that balance yet. I think a lot of Black women and gender experiencing people have been reared to be like the superwoman. That trope is still, that stereotype is so real that I still feel like I'm the superwoman, and I am still decolonizing that. And I do that through my faith as a Christian, and I do that through therapy. Like I told y'all before, we weren't supposed to go to therapy, right? But I had real anxiety attacks last year to the point where my teeth were chattering. And I was like, I'm not going to be alive. I want to have children. I want to get married. I want to, live a full life, not in destitution, not in illness, because that runs in my family, right? But to live a full life where I'm loved for who I am, and I still have not found that balance yet. But like, when just to sit down, because sometimes I feel like I need to do everything. But I've been saying no a lot more lately.
Oh, thank you! Oh my God!
And then my fiance is always saying to block people, so yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm still navigating, and like trying to learn how to trust people again, and like making the choice with the discernment, right? Like, you don't have to give everyone everything, and I think that's a lesson in boundaries, right? Like, I didn't grow up with, like most of us, we're not taught boundaries. So being able to like go through some healing, like from a really terrible, like I went from like a terrible divorce to like a relationship that ended in toxicity, and then the pandemic happened, and then I spent most of the pandemic alone. And then I met my husband, right? So it's interesting, that dichotomy of like, oh, did I really know this person? What should I really shift in, and what choice did I play So the answer to the question is I'm making different choices. I'm making different choices, and when I can't make them, I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do different. I know for me, this March is like, I know Nakisha's gonna hate me, Jaimee might too, but like I won't be planning another thing.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Right. Like I love like for me, like personally, like I probably will not be a direct action. Right? Because my relationship to organizing is shifting as I continue to climb, like not just in age, but in wisdom. That it's actually, I have to get out of the way to make room for other people to figure it out. And I will also be here, just like how I've had other like women who are much older than me and not so much older than me who just have the wisdom, like Nakisha, to like navigate. She's been able to help us navigate, right? Like I can talk to people about different things and like not think that I'm in it alone. Because I have a very like isolated mind that like I feel alone and it's just me and I need to figure this out because no one understands. And then that's actually like it's like the cop in my head. Or like when we talk about defunding the police, we're not just talking about the system of policing. We're talking about the system in our heads. It's like we embody policing because we have to have so much control and domination over everything. So I'm trying to interrogate those things. I'm trying to make choices. I'm trying to like love in ways that feel brand new and scary, and also take that love, right? Because that also feels brand new and scary, right? And I'm just making different choices and making declarations. Like, I will not do this again, right? I will always hope to do collaborations. I actually want to do more creative work, but I will not infuse it in this way for the sake of this, because it almost like, well, we have a wonderful way of like kind of tying our identity to our action, like Jaimee said. Like that's white supremacy. So like my love, commitment, and passion to fight for women, Black girls, transgender, trans people didn't start with this bracelet. So of course it will end, right? And I don't actually have to do these things anymore because I don't want to. Right? I don't want to, right? So I get to like say that, and hopefully all of you honor me. Be like, girl, didn't you say you was a shit again? Right? That's accountability. That's community. So that's what I'm learning and figuring it out. Because like Nakisha said, like so many things are happening. We all run different organizations. Multiple organizations have multiple jobs. Like none of us have one job sitting up here. Like none of us. And it's not just because number one, we have to survive, but number two, because we know that there's work to do, and there are not enough people around us doing it. So we decide to do it. And to your point, I think that we need to take into question what does it mean to care, right? Like for ourselves, and taking a step up, taking a step back, moving out of the way, in hopes that someone will pick it up. Because I think that's the hard thing too. It's like we can let it go, but like who's gonna pick it up? Now I feel responsible, right? So like I need to. There's something for me to interrogate there, right? What happens if I let it go and no one picks it up? Because that probably will happen. Yeah. So thank you for your inviting us in with that question. Instead of calling, I don't feel like it was a call out. I feel like it was an invitation in. It was a lovely read. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And the bracelet is for sale.
Thank you.
Just so you guys know, we're not open for shopping yet outside of the break.